Richard Deakins was a man who seemed to have it all: a successful businessman, a loving family, and a lifestyle that turned heads in his hometown of Chasetown, Staffordshire. To the outside world, he was the epitome of success, a self-made entrepreneur who had built a comfortable life for himself and his family. But beneath the surface of his polished image lay a web of rumors and whispers that hinted at a far more dangerous reality. Deakins wasn't flashy, but people talked. They talked about his connections, his ability to move in circles far beyond those of ordinary entrepreneurs. His wealth and influence didn't go unnoticed, and neither did the rumors that his success might be tied to something darker: drugs, shady deals, and the criminal underworld. While no solid proof ever came to light, in the world of organized crime, perception is everything. And by 2010, Richard Deakins had become a man who drew attention, both the kind he wanted and the kind he didn't. But how did a seemingly ordinary businessman from Chasetown become entangled in a world of danger and violence? And what led to his shocking and brutal murder in the summer of 2010? This is the story of Richard Deakins, a man whose rise to success was as mysterious as his untimely downfall. To his neighbors in Chasetown, Richard Deakins was the picture of success. He lived in a spacious home on Midway Street, drove expensive cars, and seemed to have it all: a loving girlfriend, 2 young daughters, and a lifestyle that many could only dream of. On the surface, he was a family man, a hard worker who had built his wealth through legitimate means. But as the saying goes, not everything is as it seems. Behind closed doors, whispers about Deakins' true source of wealth began to spread. While he presented himself as a successful entrepreneur, rumors swirled that his fortune was tied to something far more sinister. The Midlands, particularly areas like Birmingham and Stoke-on-Trent, were known as hotspots for organized crime, especially the drug trade. And Deakins' name kept popping up in connection with this shadowy world. People talked about his alleged ties to powerful figures in the criminal underworld. They speculated that his wealth wasn't just the result of smart business deals, but was instead fueled by drugs, money laundering, and other illegal activities. Yet, despite the rumors, there was no concrete evidence to prove these claims. Deakins maintained his legitimate front, and for a while, it seemed like he might just be a victim of gossip and envy. But in the world of organized crime, perception is everything. Even if the rumors weren't entirely true, they were enough to put Deakins on the radar of some very dangerous people. His growing wealth and influence made him a figure of interest, not just to law enforcement, but to rival gangs and criminal factions who saw him as a potential threat or a valuable asset. Deakins' double life was a precarious balancing act. On one hand, he was a respected businessman and family man. On the other, he was a man with alleged connections to a brutal and unforgiving underworld. And as his star continued to rise, the risks grew larger. The question wasn't just whether Deakins was involved in criminal activity, it was whether he could survive in a world where loyalty was fragile and power came at a deadly cost. As Richard Deakins' wealth and influence grew, so did the attention he attracted, not just from admirers, but from those who saw him as a threat. The Midlands, particularly cities like Birmingham and Stoke-on-Trent, were notorious battlegrounds for control of the drug trade. Rival gangs fought viciously for dominance, and anyone who rose too quickly in this world risked becoming a target. Deakins' name began to surface in connection with powerful figures in the criminal underworld. While he maintained a legitimate front, it was becoming harder to ignore the whispers about his alleged involvement in the drug trade. Some believed he was a key player, moving drugs between major cities and amassing wealth through illegal means. Others saw him as a pawn, someone who had gotten too close to dangerous people and was now in over his head. But in the underworld, perception is everything. Even if Deakins wasn't directly involved in criminal activities, his growing wealth and connections made him a person of interest. Rival gangs began to see him as a potential threat, someone who could disrupt the delicate balance of power. And in a world where respect is enforced by violence, being perceived as a threat could be a death sentence. Tensions were brewing behind the scenes. Deakins' rise had drawn too much attention, and in the criminal underworld, that's the kind of mistake that can cost a man his life. Whether it was jealousy, a power struggle, or a debt that needed to be settled, one thing was clear: Deakins had made enemies, and those enemies were watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The underworld's watchful eye was unrelenting. Every move Deakins made was being monitored, every connection scrutinized. He may have thought he was untouchable, but in reality, he was walking a tightrope. And as the pressure mounted, it was only a matter of time before the delicate balance tipped, and the consequences would be deadly. On the morning of July 5, 2010, Richard Deakins' life came to a brutal and shocking end. This wasn't a crime of passion or a random act of violence. It was a meticulously planned execution, carried out with chilling precision. The hit was a stark reminder of the dangers that came with Deakins' rumored ties to the criminal underworld, and it sent shockwaves through his community. The man tasked with carrying out the murder was David Harrison, a hired gun with a reputation for efficiency. Harrison wasn't an amateur. He was a seasoned professional who knew how to get the job done without leaving a trace. For weeks he had been watching Deakins, studying his routines and mapping out every detail of his daily life. Harrison knew when Deakins would be home, when his guard would be down, and exactly how to strike without alerting anyone. That morning, around 8:30 a.m., Harrison made his move. Dressed in dark clothing, a balaclava, and blue latex gloves, he pulled up to Deakins' home in a black Vauxhall Corsa. Armed with a sawn-off shotgun, he entered the property with ease, moving through the house quickly and silently. There were no signs of struggle, no alarms raised. Deakins, lying in bed, never saw it coming. Harrison entered the bedroom and fired multiple shots at point-blank range, killing Deakins instantly. The sawn-off shotgun, chosen for its effectiveness at close range, ensured that the job was done with brutal efficiency. There was no need for a second attempt. After the deed was done, Harrison didn't linger. He left the scene as calmly as he had entered, got back into the Corsa, and disappeared. The entire act took only minutes, but its impact would be felt for years to come. Neighbors who had seen Harrison enter the home quickly called the police, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. Deakins was dead, and the killer was gone. The getaway car was later found abandoned in a nearby field, but Harrison had already vanished into the shadows. The hit was a professional job, carried out with cold, calculated precision. It was clear that this wasn't the work of amateurs. It was the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But who had ordered the hit, and why? As the investigation began, one thing became clear. Richard Deakins' murder was more than just a personal tragedy. It was a message, a stark reminder of the brutal rules that govern the world of organized crime. When police arrived at Richard Deakins' home on that fateful morning in July 2010, they were met with a scene that screamed professionalism. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious clues left behind, just a cold, calculated murder that pointed to the work of a hired killer. The investigation that followed would be anything but straightforward, as detectives quickly realized they were dealing with a web of connections that stretched deep into the criminal underworld. The first break in the case came from CCTV footage. A neighbor's security camera had captured the hitman entering and leaving Deakins' property. The footage showed a man in dark clothing, a balaclava, and blue latex gloves, details that would later prove crucial. But with no immediate leads, the case seemed destined to go cold. That's when the police turned to the public for help. In December 2010, the murder was featured on an episode of BBC's Crime Watch, a show known for its role in solving high-profile cases. The CCTV footage was broadcast to millions of viewers, along with a £20,000 reward for information leading to the killer's capture. The exposure paid off. A former criminal associate of David Harrison recognized him from the footage, noting a unique detail. The balaclava Harrison wore had a mouthpiece sewn shut, a trademark he used to conceal his missing teeth. This tip led investigators straight to Harrison, but the case didn't end there. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a network of connections that tied Harrison to the planning and execution of the hit. Phone records placed him near Deakins' home in the weeks leading up to the murder, and a search of his van turned up blue latex gloves identical to those seen in the CCTV footage. At Harrison's home, police found a criminal kit containing wigs, masks, and nearly £26,000 in cash, evidence that pointed to a man who was no stranger to the world of contract killings. But while Harrison's arrest was a significant breakthrough, it only raised more questions. Who had hired him, and why had Richard Deakins been targeted? The investigation began to zero in on the Midlands criminal underworld, where Deakins' name had been linked to powerful figures involved in the drug trade. One name kept surfacing: John Anslow, a notorious drug kingpin, known for his ruthless tactics and daring prison escape in 2012. Despite the mounting suspicions, the police struggled to build a case against Anslow. While it was clear that Deakins' murder was tied to a power struggle or debt within the drug scene, the evidence against Anslow was circumstantial. In 2015, after a lengthy trial, Anslow was cleared of all charges related to Deakins' murder. The true mastermind behind the hit remained a mystery. For Deakins' family, the investigation brought little closure. While Harrison and his accomplice, Daryl Deakins, was sentenced to life in prison, the question of who ordered the hit and why remained unanswered. The case was a stark reminder of the complexities of the criminal underworld, where secrets are buried deep and the truth is often locked away behind a wall of silence. As the investigation into Richard Deakins' murder unfolded, one question loomed larger than all others: who ordered the hit? While David Harrison, the hired gun, and his accomplice, Daryl Deakins, were brought to justice, the true mastermind behind the assassination remained shrouded in mystery. The police had their suspicions, and all signs pointed to one man, John Anslow, a notorious drug kingpin whose name was synonymous with power, fear, and brutality in the Midlands criminal underworld. Anslow was no ordinary criminal. By 2010, he had built a reputation as one of the most powerful figures in the regional drug trade, known for his involvement in large-scale trafficking operations. His influence extended far beyond the streets of his hometown, Tipton, and he commanded respect and fear from both allies and rivals. But Anslow's notoriety reached new heights in January 2012, when he pulled off a daring prison escape that seemed straight out of a Hollywood movie. While being transported from HMP Hewell in Worcestershire to court, where he was facing serious charges related to a £10 million drug ring, Anslow's prison van was ambushed by masked men. The attackers rammed the van, smashed its windows, and overpowered the guards, freeing Anslow in a matter of minutes. It was the first time in British history that a Category A prisoner, someone considered a maximum security threat, had escaped in such a brazen manner. The breakout sparked one of the largest manhunts in recent years, and Anslow remained on the run until his capture in northern Cyprus in March 2012. Anslow's reputation made him a prime suspect in Deakins' murder. Police believed that the hit was connected to a power struggle or debt within the drug trade, and Anslow had both the motive and the means to order such an execution. In 2012, he was charged in connection with Deakins' murder, but the case against him was far from airtight. Despite the police's suspicions, the evidence against Anslow was largely circumstantial. Witnesses were reluctant to come forward, and key details were buried in the murky world of organized crime. In 2015, after a lengthy trial, Anslow was cleared of all charges related to Deakins' murder. The court found insufficient evidence to prove his involvement beyond a reasonable doubt, and he walked free. For Deakins' family, Anslow's acquittal was a devastating blow. It meant that the true mastermind behind the hit, the person who had wanted Deakins dead, remained untouchable. The police closed the case, stating they weren't looking for anyone else in connection with the murder. But for those who knew the inner workings of the criminal underworld, the truth was clear. In a world where power is everything, and loyalty is enforced by violence, some secrets are never meant to be uncovered. To this day, the identity of the person who ordered Richard Deakins' murder remains a mystery. Was it John Anslow, as many believed, or was it someone else, a shadowy figure who has managed to evade justice entirely? The answer may never be known, but one thing is certain: in the brutal world of gangland Britain, being at the top always comes at a cost. In December 2012, David Harrison and Daryl Deakins stood trial for the murder of Richard Deakins at Birmingham Crown Court. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Harrison was the hired gun who carried out the hit, while Deakins was his trusted accomplice, responsible for driving the getaway car. The evidence against them was damning. CCTV footage showed Harrison entering Deakins' property, and phone records placed him near the house in the weeks leading up to the murder. Deakins, linked to the black Vauxhall Corsa used in the crime, was identified as the driver who helped Harrison escape the scene. After a 6-week trial, the jury delivered their verdict. Harrison, the triggerman, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 37 years. Deakins, though considered a lesser participant, was handed a life sentence with a minimum of 30 years for his role in the planning and execution of the murder. On the surface, it seemed like justice had been served, but for Deakins' family, the trial brought little closure. Throughout the proceedings, both Harrison and Deakins maintained their innocence. Harrison showed no remorse, even attempting to appeal his conviction by claiming the wrong man had been charged. Deakins also launched appeals, arguing that his identification as the getaway driver was flawed, but their efforts failed, and the sentences stood. For Deakins' loved ones, the trial only deepened the sense of injustice. They had always maintained that Richard was not involved in the criminal underworld. His mother, Carol Deakin, publicly stated that her son was a hard-working man who had no ties to drugs or illegal activities. To them, his murder was not just a tragedy, it was an unsolved mystery. The case left lingering questions that no trial could answer. Who had ordered the hit? Why had Deakins been targeted? While the police suspected John Anslow, the notorious drug kingpin, the evidence against him was insufficient to secure a conviction. Anslow walked free, and no one else was ever charged with orchestrating the murder. For Deakins' family, the lack of answers was a painful reminder of the brutal realities of gangland Britain, in a world where perception is everything, and power is enforced by violence. Richard Deakins had become a target, whether he deserved it or not. His story is a stark reminder of the dangers that come with rising too high, in a world where loyalty is fragile, and survival is never guaranteed. To this day, the identity of those who pulled the strings behind Deakins' execution remains a mystery. The truth is locked away, buried in the shadows of the criminal underworld, where silence is the only currency that matters. For Deakins' family, the pain of his loss is compounded by the knowledge that the full story may never be told.